I think
Might as
so.
well. Because I have this note for myself. But here's my notes for the class. And the first note is this.
Record.
It says
You
record, you
record.
idiot. Can you read the whole thing? Wait, this is to me.
Yeah.
Record, you idiot.
Record, you idiot. Record, you idiot.
So I've already accomplished my first goal. And I've just opened the question of anyone who wants to chime in on what has been either useful or helpful, or how the class could be more helpful. Any, what's working for you?
Well, my question is, how did you facilitate more interaction among us students on Zoom? In the class that you did that, you said better.
Well, some of it is, like you're very interactive. And so some of it is that some people are more interested in interacting than others and do more of that. So some of it is just the community of folks that were there. But you can ask Rita that. I don't know. What did I do something then that I'm not doing now?
Well, thanks
Well-
for the upgraded word.
I'm not,
Interactive.
I'm not
Good
so
mouth.
sure you did anything different. It was a different time. It was during the fall last year that I took the class, and we voted during that period of time for the last president. And there was a lot of passion about that. And a lot of discussion about the narcissistic part of it and what drove certain people to support that. And
That.
not. And so, that piece of it is, as far as the election goes, and we had just spent, 5 years of hell with,
Yeah.
Trump. And so there was a lot of that. And so I think that was the difference in the time frame. And it just made a difference. The class was mostly women, I'd have to say. I don't know if that is a piece of it. And we were moved
I had a class in between,
be
which
connected.
I had a class in between, which was half and half men and women, and also had a lot of people felt very bonded at the end of that one.
Wow. So that
I
wasn't
think
it.
it could be just a difference in the people that are in it. You just get some more
Exactly.
talkative folks and you don't get talkative folks.
Yeah, and I want to be very respectful. I certainly don't want to pressure anyone to feel that they need to be saying stuff or interacting more than they are. I just want to be sure that I'm making it as possible for those who want to, or encouraging as I can,
I think
And,
the class on economics was, there wasn't a lot of room. That was the week that you were concerned about morale. And there wasn't a lot of room in that particular class for discussion.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it was the most technical, and it was the one where basically I know a bunch of stuff that most people don't, from the economic stuff. So yeah, I think and then an overall concern for mine, but I think not everybody wasn't here last time, but I think that's why we took a step back last time to focus on morale, is that in offering the idea of a paradigm, that's a big clunky hunk and a huge generalization. And my belief is it's a useful generalization, because it can help us say, oh, here it is again. Oh, here it is in how we raise children. Here it is in the economy. Here it is in how we think about the environment. Here it is in how we think about the relations between people, and that can be helpful so that we we can be more conscious, more alert, and more ready to fight back, if you want to call it that. Hold on a second. Hi, Larry and Sandy. So I'm hoping it's useful, but the danger of it is that it comes off feeling like that it doesn't adequately. And this Quinn brought this up. A lot of people have brought it up, and I think we've integrated it. It doesn't adequately bring up that the new thing is born within the old, and that the new thing is both ancient and part of the ongoing learning process. And you know, that there's just a tremendous amount of stuff that's counter to you know, where the life force expresses itself in us in a way that's counter to the dominant paradigm. And that's why the dominant paradigm is ultimately brittle and collapsing. So that would be that's what we talked about last time. And that would be a concern of mine, to make sure that it doesn't just end up feeling like, oh my God, what can we do? This is, you know. So
In your last class, Quinn had you repeat the thing, the little saying
yeah,
that you
Yeah.
had. I
Yeah.
love
have
that.
it
I
right
wrote,
here.
I was glad, Quinn, that you would ask that question, because then I wrote it down as well.
Thanks.
Oh.
I've shared this with some of my friends, that quote that starts with empowered and ends with sacred, because I think it's just a really swell bunch of words together.
Yep.
I really like it. I've shared
Cool.
it with folks.
cool.
Yeah.
We
Me
can make it our catechism if we want. We'll recite it before. All right. So where are we at? 6. Let's give it a couple more minutes before I start the main talking. So for anyone who just came in, we basically, I've been opening it up with my curiosity about how's it working for people, and what's working and what isn't. And we sort of got around to whatever ways that we can all, but that I can facilitate interactions among people.
Mm.
And that's really
I think-
well, that's sort of the challenge I took on with this course for me, is to integrate the intellectual lecturer part of me and the facilitator, relator, experiential part. So that's my work, and that I want to find a successful way that I'm hoping to do in the class in general.
For me, interaction wouldn't really feel bonded, if you will, until I would meet with somebody outside of this. I think I'm very aware that I don't think you can do, for example, therapy on Zoom. I don't think you can, unless I can't really bond with somebody, just an image on a screen. I just can't. I don't know how these therapists do therapy on Zoom, do it well. I don't.
Well,
I've been in my office the whole time.
I noticed that I have
haven't
the
stopped
same.
being in my office.
I have the same belief, but I have to say that I feel like I have a very strong sense of you through this medium. I don't claim to know you intimately, but in terms of the amount of time we
Yeah.
spent together, I think we can get a true interaction and sense of each other.
Yeah. Do you think you can do therapy on Zoom?
I don't know. I'm not sure I want to make that a topic right now, but
Okay, sure.
you know, that's a whole
I'd
other.
just be curious.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
The short answer, yes. But and this is from a body-oriented therapist, so I have many reasons to
Yeah, that's interesting.
be suspicious
Yeah,
of
that's
that. Yeah.
interesting.
But the fact is, okay, I'll say 2 words on it. One is we're right in each other's faces, which is pretty intimate. And the other, but again, I'm just going to say 2 things because then I want to move on. But we're in each other's faces, and there's a degree to which the boundary also creates some safety. and that safety can sometimes be helpful for people talking about that's something you do in different ways in the therapy room, but in some way it offers that, and that can help some people to take risks, but whatever.
Okay.
And I'd love to talk more with you about that, but this class isn't the place
Okay.
for that. Yeah. Okay. All right. I think now there was something I wanted to remember to do. I'm trying to remember what it was. Okay.
Record.
We are recording. Thank you.
Yay.
So you all can, you can have my back on that if I mess up and forget to record, or if I pause it for a break and then don't put it on again. I'll try not to do that. All right. So today I want to talk about evolution. And to remind you again that this conversation takes place in the context of the concentric spheres. And the purpose of the concentric spheres is to say that we make the same error or have the same blind spots or have the same, are delusional in the same way. We make the same mistake at every one of those levels. And the use of that is that the clearer we get that, the more we can combat at each of those levels. And we can sort of say, there you go again. See, you're doing it again. So for instance, evolution is, basically a theory of nature. And what happens is that every culture projects its values and its worldview onto nature. And what you'll notice is that one second. What you'll notice is that that it's basically the same worldview or the same model. In evolution, in the conventional, there's a lot of really creative, interesting stuff happening in the area of evolutionary biology. I'm going to talk about some of it, but so I want to acknowledge that. But still, it's in the context of a conventional view, and so that just as in economics, I'm saying we're projecting the same view onto society, same view of human nature onto nature in our theory of evolution. So just as when we talked about economics, we're saying that standard economics sees society as the result of individual selfish competition. The justification for the system is that when individuals are competing to maximize their self-interest, that will lead to a good social result for the whole. And that's essentially the justification for the capitalist economic system, that it serves the needs and the demands of individuals who are maximizing their individual selfish interest. And that's what the whole class on economics was about. And so I'm saying, but the exact same model. And that in that model, it neglects the idea that there can be a social interest which transcends the sum of the individual interests. That society as a whole has interests that are not just adding up the interests of individuals. And that's going to be a major theme of today's discussion. So the mainstream evolutionary theory stresses that the competition of the parts as the organizing principle of nature. Competition for survival, sort of dog-eat-dog model of survival, the survival of the fittest. On the individual level, individuals are competing for survival and species are competing for survival. And that competition for survival is essentially the organizing principle of evolution. That's the mainstream position. That's how you understand it. That's how you best understand what's going on. And the problem with that is a couple of, well, so we'll talk, this class is all going to be about the problems with that and what that theory misses. And it is not that competition is not a principle or a part of what goes on, because it does. But what it ignores is the interdependence and co-creation of nature, the independence of all the parts and how all the parts co-create a whole, and that whole has characteristics that transcend the parts. And so that, which is actually amounts to what I've been calling an atomistic model of reality. And that atomistic model says that starts from the atoms and works up. So it says that causality happens from the individual to the species to the whole. Causality, if you want to understand something, that's what we do. We analyze, we break it down. And when we look at the DNA, now we understand how evolution works. Or when you look at the individual, now we understand this. And that's valuable. That's half the truth. But what it doesn't deal with is that the whole also shapes the parts. So species are surviving to the extent that they find a place, that they have a healthy relationship with the whole, and find a place in the whole. And cultures survive insofar as they have a healthy place and are influenced by the species surviving, because if the species survive, the culture doesn't. And individuals survive depending on their the adaptive traits that evolution develops are those that are compatible in individuals, or those that are compatible with the survival of the group. And the adaptive traits of the group have to do with the traits that are compatible with the larger ecological environment. So it's a unicausal view, atomism, rather than a feedback view. Now, it's really important to challenge that. So the theory of evolution, that could all sound very technical and very, get into technical debates and whatever, but I want to say why I think it's important to sort of challenge it head on is, here's some. One, if that's the view, if how we are is based on the genetically determined result of individuals all competing against everyone else, or species all competing, so then it can't change. It's essentially saying the way things are is based on human nature. Now, again, every culture has a theory of human nature and a theory of the whole, a theory of how nature works, human nature and how nature works. So to the extent that it's telling us this is real human nature, dog eat dog, fight for yourself, self-interest. One of the problems with that is it means that any kinder view is essentially utopian. It's unrealistic. So then you'll hit that all the time. Sure, it'd be nice if we all cooperate and care about each other, but that's unrealistic. That's not how people are. But that view doesn't take into account the fact that how people are is also shaped by what the culture brings out in people and manifests in its citizens. So it's important to challenge it because it's essentially fatalistic. If you say human nature is basically selfish, then civilization is imposed externally, like over and against human nature. And that's the Hobbesian view. Life in nature is nasty, brutish, and short, or something like that. And therefore, and we all want to just kill and rape and take care of ourselves. But how civilization happened was we all said, I love killing and raping, but I don't like being killed and raped. Let's make a deal. I won't kill and rape you, and if you don't kill and rape me, and we'll call that society. So society then is sort of an intellectual construct that's been created against essentially human nature. And I want to say, if you think that civilization is done in spite of human nature, you're going to feel justified in using incredibly extreme measures to dominate human nature and to have the society you want. Some of that happened, I think, when I think the healthy ideals of Marxism became Stalinism, and they said, well, people are, we're just going to have to brutalize them into being cooperative because they won't do it otherwise. It also tells us that we're selfish. We're fundamentally selfish, which means it blinds us to our unselfish parts, makes us think of our unselfish parts as kind of nice, but not really fundamental to who we are. And that our selfish parts those are sort of the real grounded ones, and the rest is little kind of fluff. So it interferes with our relationship to ourselves. And ultimately, the view leaves us isolated, separate from ourselves and others and nature. So again, we keep talking about polarities, and we keep talking about the narcissistic view being an unbalanced view of polarized situations. So it's real important to say that it's not that there's no individual self-interest, or there's no competition, or that things to exist have to take care of themselves. It's just saying, and so now we're back to the basic idea of belonging, which is something that transcends and underlies the polarity of individual and whole. And so belonging would be, to belong, you have to thrive as an individual or as a part or as a species. And you have to connect with and weave yourself into and contribute to life, the web of life. And in some way which means that that's a false contradiction to some degree on the surface. It's a false, the idea of individual versus society, or species versus the ecology as a whole. And we'll remember that we said narcissism thrives on exacerbating polarities, on treating polarities not as a conversation, but as a contest or a war. So I had experience a couple of summers ago where I felt like I sort of got it on a different level. This is not some great new insight, but I just experienced it in a way that was vivid for me. I was on my back deck, and we have a St. John's wort shrub, dense shrub behind our house. And every one of them had these glorious orange, yellow, buttery blossoms. And each of these blossoms had like a trampoline, had like a fluffy stamen, I don't know, whatever, that fluffy stuff sticking up. It was like a cushion. And on each of these things, almost all of them, there was a black and yellow, fat, happy bumblebee. And it was like it was bumping up on it like a trampoline. And it was obviously in ecstasy. It was full of pollen, and they were just, each of them were like, whoa. And what I came away with was that this is part of, right, that as opposed to the idea that evolution is the survival of the fittest, when the fittest is defined in some crude way, like the biggest, baddest, meanest, that evolution is the survival of that which fits in, that which finds a place, that which has a niche. And so what I got from watching this was that it was like the plants were saying, hey, look what I got. Anybody want this? Any takers? Anybody interested? And the bees would go like, whoa, yeah, thank you. Ooh, this is cool. Yes, sir. And because what each of them had to offer, because the plant offering its pollen was accepted, because the offer was accepted by something in nature, it gets to propagate and have its pollen spread. And because the bees' offer of flying around and spreading the pollen was accepted, the bees get to survive. So anyway, that was my sort of a kind of cool way of really feeling like I could experience that everything exists has to offer something that has to be accepted by something else in order to be woven into the web of life.
Can I say something here?
Yeah.
So I get a little bit different take on that.
Uh-huh.
In order for that to happen, the two things you're talking about, the bumblebees and the St. John's wort, have to be who they were brought into this world to be. They have to be authentic. They have to be their authentic selves at that moment in time. And unless we come into the world as our authentic self without the cover and the shields and all of the things we do to protect ourselves, especially from our childhoods, then we don't have as much to offer or to be part of that symbiotic relationship. We have to somehow find a way to be authentic, which vulnerable, and of course we have to not be authentic in front of everybody, but you know, in relationship, I think that we do.
That's great. You know, in therapy, Reichian therapy is a lot about body armor, and it talks about the defenses being built in. But the point is, when the defenses become chronic, so you don't have any choice, then you are defended from everybody and everything, including those who want to love you. So that another image would be a shield, that that you're going to need a shield, but you also need to be able to know when to put it down. And that's, to me, is what authentic self-interest would be. I mean, I love that you putting it that way. And so what's authentic is you're authentically taking care of yourself, because the balance is not vanishing or self-sacrifice, or you're taking care of yourself, but you're also making yourself available when something's offered that you want, that's truly loving and nourishing for you. Cool. I'm going to talk about forestry because I got trained in that at UC Berkeley 400 or 500 years ago. I was a graduate student, and one of the things we studied was forestry. And forest practice is one of the places where the messed up view of the ignorance about ecology really shows up. Now, again, there's fantastic work being done on forest practices. So this is, but it's against this, it's within and against this context. So what they taught us was, that forest ecology is a competition. And therefore, there's good trees and bad trees. Of course, the good trees are the ones that are commercially valuable, and the bad trees are the ones that aren't. And they're competing. So if you can get rid of the bad trees, it's good for the good trees. And so what you're really trying to do, and that's what they do when they clear cut, you clear cut everything. And then you do two things. You spread poison so that the stuff that the stuff that's in succession that should come before the trees, the underbrush that creates shelter for seeds and prepares the earth, that doesn't happen because that's not commercially valuable. And then you plant too close together the good trees. And what you've done is you've turned the forest into a tree farm. And that tree farm will have all the problems that what's the word for one unicrop agriculture?
Monoculture.
Huh?
Monoculture.
Yeah, it will have. You've created a monoculture tree farm, and that will not have diversity, and it will blah blah, and you'll have to use a lot of pesticides and to keep it good, blah blah. So one of the notions they came up with was the notion of a senile forest. I used to work with a lot of former forest workers who became drug addicts who ended up coming into therapy as they lost their jobs and lost their place in the world. And one of the things they would say was, these are senile forests. When you're clear cutting, you're just getting rid of senile forests. Now, it's true they're senile forests in the sense that, you know, if you look at tree rings, you'll see that the early tree rings are big and fat, and they get smaller and smaller and smaller. So the rate of growth is, of course, greatest in youth. That's true of human beings too. If we were just interested in growing the most pounds of human meat as possible, we would, I guess we'd harvest ourselves at 16, 17, 18, and we wouldn't be, all those other later stages are, well, we have to harvest it late enough so that we could have some, so let's say 23, so we'd have some kids. But basically, why waste energy on human beings at the point where they're no longer creating maximized pounds of meat per, you know? So, so what that doesn't recognize, of course, well, one thing it doesn't have is humility, because it doesn't recognize that forests knew how to be forests before human beings walked the earth. And the second thing, the other thing it doesn't recognize is that a forest is a community, and that the old trees nurse the young trees. And one of the things that, so if you take a walk in where you see all these tight little ugly bunched up trees, usually lodge poles, that are all stuffed and too can't hardly breathe, and that are the most enormous fire danger. When you see that, I remember taking a walk and seeing that on one side and seeing a place where Lomakatsi had cleared the forest on the other. And it was easy to look at that and say, oh, this is what happens when we don't tend to it. This happens when we tend to it. Well, if you find that kind of forest and you walk around, you are very likely to find enormous old growth stumps. So it's when those stumps, when the old trees are pulled out, you get essentially a crop of orphans. The old trees shade them out, and they won't all, you know, they'll have to find places where they can get to the sun. The old trees are also fireproof largely because they self-limb, right? You look at a tree and the bottom limbs get shaded out and break off. So you see a tree and it's got these broken off branches, and then it's green on top. I'm talking about conifers. So you've created a huge fire danger forest, and because you've created a crop of same age, same species orphans. And they're orphans, and to call them orphans is a way of recognizing that that a forest is a community of species and of different ages. And that's what makes a healthy forest. Another example was, you know, an obvious example is it may be that the wasps that kill the bugs in the good trees live in the bad trees. Duh. It may be that the woodpeckers that protect the good trees live in the bad trees. So there's this incredible web of self-supporting stuff that we had no idea about. And when we look at the forest from the point of view that it's all a competition and that we're trying to maximize what we want, and that means everything else is the enemy of what we want, you're going to end up with these horrendous forest issues. Now, there's an amazingly creative and wonderful bunch of work that's been being done that takes this is sort of stuff I could have said, was saying 20 years ago or more, and people were saying, but there's a whole new thing, which is you've probably heard about. There's a movie about it. Anyway, it's about fungi, which is the discovery of the role of what's the word for not the fruiting body, not the mushroom, but the the underlying.
The mycelia.
Yeah.
The mycelia.
Yeah. the just the web of fungi that live under the ground, and that you know, essentially the huge part of the web that unifies everything. And so I'm not going to go into that in detail right now, but I will say that one of the books on the reading list, called The Entangled Life by Merlin Sheldrake, is about that. And that there's a woman named Susan Simard, Simard, who did some of the original research and got it into science and got it sort of respectable in scientific circles about that. And the word for it is the Wood Wide Web. If you Google Wood Wide Web, you'll get that. And also the book Underland, which is one of the books I put on the reading list. Chapter 4 of that is a very nice, crisp summary of these discoveries about the role of the mycelium. And so, so it essentially shows that the mycelium connect the roots of trees to each other, that trees send nutrients to each other, that trees send warning signals to other trees when they're infested, saying, hey, there's infestation coming, and it helps the other trees get ready with their defenses against whatever blight is coming by, that dying trees offer their, not just in the obvious way, we see it all the time when we just look at the ground and we see trees turning into earth, but underground, they offer their nutrients as they're dying to their offspring and to the other trees in their environment. So it's just an amazing thing. 1 second, Quinn. And what's most amazing about it, we're so smart. We know so much. It's been 10 years or 15, 10, 5 that we've discovered this underground network and the role of fungi. It's a whole kingdom that we've hardly noticed, except to pick some and eat them, and for penicillin, some of the uses. And so, so what that really is, helps us see in more concrete ways, is mutualism. And mutualism is essentially the acceptable ecological word for the connectedness of things and how things make mutually beneficial arrangements with each other. Life supporting, mutually beneficial arrangements with each other. And that used to be called, when I went to school, it was symbiosis. But the word symbiosis kind of implied that it was sort of an exception. Here's two things. So, and the big one was, if you mention symbiosis, there'd always be one example would be lichen. And they say, wow, lichen, they have green, they are a combination between an algae, which is green and therefore can digest the sunset, use sun energy to create nutrients, and a fungus, which dissolves and can create minerals that the thing needs. But this was like this exception, rather than that it's the fundamental, fundamental way things work. So this view, essentially, what you get is that a forest is a superorganism, that you can look at the forest as an organism, just as you can, as you can look at, the Gaia principle, which is that you can look at the whole planet as an organism. Quinn, you were.
Well, I was going to make a comment about trees, and that I think a great example of that is a fairy ring of redwoods.
Yeah. And
how they take care of, we had 7 of them on our property when we lived on the coast, and it was amazing how the formation of the different ones. But we had one in particular that was absolutely round. We called it the cathedral, and we had a hammock between the two of the trees so that we could just lay there and look up. And these were really old ones. It's probably one of the older ones that were there. And then the burl that they make is so amazing. I think it's one of the more amazing trees and what it produces.
Yeah.
That those burls are unbelievable, but they're really amazing trees. And they were always on our property, and they were always in a fairy ring. And I imagine they were cooperating and whatnot, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I imagine that when you did the hammock, that was a symbiotic relationship, right, with the tree, or no, maybe you were being a, what's the other word when it's one way?
Well, I'll tell you one thing. We were up on a ridge, which was very hot, and it was anywhere from 10 to 15 degrees cooler in there than
Yeah.
it was outside.
Yeah.
I mean, they were close together. It was, I mean, they weren't built like this, but they were close. They really created a coolness. Much cooler in there.
Someone just sent me a message that Robert George has his hand up, which I now see is true.
This is the most interesting topic because I really feel like it's fundamentally the basis of the whole trouble we have right now. And I think it's also history, not only just our environment. Because if you look at the history of mankind, it's gone from tribal to city to kingdoms to city-states to communism, capitalism. And I think really basically it is all about evolution. But the issue has to be evolution to in what direction. And one really excellent movie you want to watch if you're interested is Breaking Boundaries by David, what's his last name? Attenborough.
Attenborough.
And he also, Attenborough. And he's really talking about the biofeedback that we're getting from our current theory of life. You know, we're in danger, except for one principle of about 8 or 9 of them, we're in trouble. So the biofeedback is what we're doing isn't working. But there's that old saying, if you think something isn't working, keep right on doing it.
Yeah.
And you'll get the same result. The other thing too is that I think self-interest is absolutely important. Every one of us has self-interest. There's no question. The issue is how can we make life more interesting for ourselves and for all of us? How can we all benefit? And I think that's probably where the theory of communism came from. The problem was that the theory was fulfilled with our ordinary characters of all kinds. And one of the things that think of his name, Weber, I don't know. Anyway, he has the levels of human development, starting at the embryo, and all of us have to go through all those stages into the age of reason, into adulthood, and so on. And it's possible to get arrested anywhere. And we have a lot of people who are arrested in our culture, in all cultures, and they get into trouble. So
I think that analogy, that analogy of, what is it, of human development and of an individual human development and the species development is really, really powerful and interesting. Yeah.
Definitely. And the other thing is that nature is alive and interrelated. That if anybody's interested, you can watch that on mushrooms. It's Paul Stamets on YouTube. And that was what happened was the lumber companies were cutting down all the trees with mushrooms on them. But he found that the agarikon mushroom would heal colony disorder. But the reason the bees weren't healing themselves because the lumber companies had cut down all the trees with agarikon on it. So he has created a solution of that developed from that mycelia, which is used to heal colony disorder, colony collapse disorder.
That's great. So that's just a perfect, clear example of
Yeah.
what we get. So ignorance is all right if there's humility with it, you know, but ignorance and arrogance is really scary and dangerous.
Faith.
I'm going to take a little switch, same topic, but now I'm going to talk about this. That was sort of forest evolution. Now I'm going to talk about human evolution. And, you know, in all of these cases, you talk about these films and you talk about the work of the people we talk, there's fabulous work happening that's discovering exactly, you know, we are learning exactly what our moment in history is requiring us to learn, whether we learn it fast enough or it gets widespread enough or it is close enough to the levers of power, that's a fight. But the fact is we are creative and we are learning, and there are fabulous human beings that are leading the way on some of this stuff. So I'm going to talk now about evolutionary biologists talking about human genetics. And basically what they've done, and they've sort of excavated pro-social human instinct, that human beings are not just self-interest maximizers, but are ruled by, if you want to, I don't know if rules the word, but you know, are characterized by profound pro-social human instincts. Some of that, Quinn, is what I've tried to summarize in my phrase, which I'll throw in here at some point. But but they've had to excavate it from out from under or against the competitive individualistic assumptions of the mainstream evolutionary theory. But what they've done is, and so the book Blueprint, which is on your reading list, by Nicholas Christakis. I could hold it up, but I guess I don't need to. So one of the things he says is that our pro-social instincts are the foundation of our ability to cooperate with each other, to create culture, to pass knowledge on from generation to generation, which are the foundation of our evolutionary success. The reason we are spread across the globe, the reason we live in a range of environments that's unbelievable, is because we've created cultures that can live in the Arctic, and cultures that can live in the rainforest, and cultures that can live in the desert. So this ability to cooperate, create culture, pass knowledge on, is not incidental or an exception to fighting for our self-interest. It's the foundation of our evolutionary success. And so here I'll read you the summary of what he called. So he says we've inherited a social suite, S-U-I-T-E. And that includes, the characteristics of it are: one, there's a capacity to have an individual identity and to recognize the individual identity of others. That's called the theory of self, I think. There's a guy named Damasio who was one of the first people who talked about that. But you have to get it that you're you and they're them and they're separate. And one of the ways they test that, for instance, is at what age does a kid, they have experiments where there's an infant or a toddler or a young person and an older person, and the older person leaves the room and something happens and the older person comes back. And at what age does the person that stayed in the room realize that, oh, they didn't see that happen, so they don't know it, or assume that it happened and they should know it too. So that's one of the experimental ways they've sort of identified what they call a theory of self. So number two is a love of offspring and a love of partners. Number three is friendship. lasting, personal requires number one, personal relationships. 4 is a tendency to form social networks. 5 is to cooperate. 6 is to experience attachment to a group, to feel attached and part of a group. 7 is mild hierarchy, by which he means not an exploitive hierarchy, but the ability to provide and follow and respect leadership. And 8 is culture, social learning, the ability to pass learning, to incorporate what we've learned into a culture and to pass it on, and thus learning and teaching. Now, I'm sure one could make other ways of listing or describing these, but this is his, and it's a very well thought out book. And one of the things he says about that is that as a tribal species, so this touches on the question of individual or group evolution, because he's saying these were part of our group evolutionary success. And so one of the things he says is, as a tribal species, individuals, we've inherited individual adaptations that contributed to the group survival. So we're back to there's a feedback. Those people, those groups that were individuals developed the adaptations of behaviors that were supportive of the survival of the group. Those groups survive. Well, if those groups survive, then that helps those individuals survive. So if you have a group of nothing but assholes and they behave in a way where the group gets destroyed, guess what? Those assholes will not be passing on their genes. That's the asshole theory of evolution. Darwin believed in group evolution. The idea of group evolution only sort of went out of fashion sometime in the last 30 years or so, maybe more. And the idea, give me a second. So people who were in the other model was, how can we explain this? How can we explain cooperative social behavior when, why would someone who behaves cooperatively, why wouldn't someone who acts purely selfishly have a survival advantage over someone who makes sacrifices for the whole? And so then there's the free rider. There's a whole literature on this. It's the free rider problem. So wouldn't the best survival tactic be that everybody else cooperates, but I cheat and I get the benefits of the cooperation, but I don't make the sacrifice? So wouldn't that be what evolution would support, that development? And so these people that are looking at the positive pro-social human behavior have really, you can feel like struggling from the handcuffs of the dominant ideology, which assumes, so all of a sudden it's a mystery. Well, how could pro-social behavior evolve if you have the model that everything's about the selfish gene and the selfish individual who propagates their genes through selfish behavior? So what you've got there is, I mean, it's only a mystery if you have the atomistic assumption that evolution happens only on the individual level, and that the individual level is the driving force of the evolutionary process. So then the gene, and there's a whole thing about the selfish gene. The gene creates the individual, creates the social, creates the species, creates the ecology. And that's a one-way causal relationship. And what it doesn't take into account is that it's a feedback loop, that it's a relationship, that the ecology shapes the species, shapes what's socially adaptive, shapes what's individually adapted, shapes the genes. So that that the pro-social behaviors are adaptive. And they're adaptive on the individual level because it's in your interest to have your group survive. Not only that, at some point, those who don't know how to play get left on the ice floe. They're just not working out. And there are instincts that for justice and stuff like that that are part of that. So here's a discussion question. Oh, 1 second. Let me look at the chat because there's 4 chats there. Gloria says, wouldn't you say that January 6th is the antithesis of what you're saying? Yes, rather an example, not the antithesis, depending on where you are explaining this. I like that. You want to say more about it? All right, and I'm gonna put the chat down. Up. No, can only type. Good, thank you. Thanks for participating in that way. And I'll try to, well, this did show up, but I'll try to be aware of it. And if anyone else sees a chat that I should notice, help me with that. All right, so can you think of examples where the whole creates the part as much as the part creates the whole? And let's give this a little space, where the whole plays as greater part, it plays as greater role in shaping and creating the part as the part does in creating the whole. In your life, in your experience. Oh, Robert, go ahead. You don't need to be called on. The hand is just a signal to everyone, but go ahead.
Well, what I'm not quite sure if this totally fits, but I had a dream about 30 years ago that I was in a swimming race. I won the race, but what I won was to get into the ovum. I was a sperm in this dream. And I thought it was kind of interesting and fun, but then as I got into the egg and the sperm body started dissolving, when the 2 pronuclei lined up, male and female, was for me a feeling of ecstasy. Absolutely beautiful.
Wow.
And in recent, I've learned that our mitochondria are developed through our mother and our grandmothers. They don't come through the male at all. Very rarely do our mitochondria ever come through the masculine. So here, our myth is that Adam and Eve, she came out of Adam's rib. Of course, she's the only one to come that way. Everybody else since has come the standard way. Secondly, to have the feminine as our basis, because as a male, you come into the uterus, the feminine, you come into the ovum, the feminine, your mitochondria come through the feminine. You do happen to be male, but predominantly there's a strong presence of the feminine in male structure. Now, in our culture, that's not recognized. Yeah, women are put down. Women have a long history of being traumatized, violence, rape, subjugation, lack of voting, lack of rights. So this myth has really perfumed, in a way, the whole development of our culture. And it's
So Robert,
patently.
first of all, that dream is fantastic, and thanks for sharing that. But I want to bring us back to the question. I'd like to focus us back on the time's a little short. I want to focus to the question: examples where the whole creates the part as well as the part creates the whole.
Well, I think that is an example of that. The whole has created the whole culture in me growing up that was particularly framed in one direction.
Okay, there you go. Okay, thanks. Thanks for clarifying that.
And the other, and I'll just quickly get to this, is it's also framed our whole culture, and it's robbed both men and women.
Right.
I'll talk later, but
That's good.
That's my point.
Okay.
Oh, good.
Bob, are you talking culturally or just anything?
Just anything. I mean, I'm about to give some examples, but I was just curious what comes up for people. But
Well, I was thinking of like choirs and symphonies, and things like that. Each individual part has to be an individual,
Mhm.
but it creates something more beautiful than the individual usually. Anyway, so that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, great. So I'm going to go on to another. This is very related topic, and it may in some way be the same question, but I'm checking my time here too. I want to do an experiential, and I still got a little more on this rap thing. So see how we work that. There's a word.
Are you going to give it? You said you were going to give some examples. Are you going to do that as
Yeah,
well?
yeah, I'll do that now. But I'm
Okay.
gonna. So so when science discovered this thing that the whole creates the part as well as the other way around, they came up with the idea that they have a term for it now. You can talk about it. It's called emergence. And what emergence is, that the whole has properties not present in the parts. Right? It's a little bit like in economics, they discovered they discovered externalities. Oh, like it's an exception. And then you realize externalities is everything that isn't part of the bottom line of the company. So emergence makes it sound like it's anyway. So, but now we can talk, and they can talk about it now. And so emergence is basically when the whole has properties not present in the parts. I have examples of that. Anybody have any they want to add? Want to talk about it?
Well, human body is one big one.
Yes.
I was thinking of a car engine.
Say a little more about that.
Well, each part has a part to play, but by itself, it has no power per se.
Perfect.
But when it's joined together with all its other parts, then the
Yes.
whole motor can run.
Great.
But
And
alone, they're
Glorious,
not, not a.
Gloria says
ahead.
Girl Scouts. Perfect. All right, I'm going to give some examples. Carbon and oxygen and hydrogen and nitrogen are not life, but they're ingredients for life. An atom doesn't, well, let's do it back. So an atom does not have all the qualities of a chemical. A chemical does not have all the qualities of cells. Cells do not by themselves have the qualities of organs. Organs do not have the qualities of an organism. An organism doesn't have the qualities of a species. The species doesn't have the qualities of an ecology. This is not rocket science, right? Okay, I'll give a couple more. Neurons are not a neural network, and a neural network is not consciousness. An individual human is not a human group, is not a species, is not an ecological niche. So emergent properties are where wholes transcend the synergy of the parts. And the obvious one was, I think, Robert, you sort of referred to this, is a dead body versus a living body. When a person dies, the ingredients are all the same. They're right there. There's no difference, but the person is dead. And what's left is not the parts or not the ingredients, but the relationship between the parts, which is what life is. A really I mean, you know, Watson and Crick, right? Those are the discoverers of the of DNA, of the spiral, the double helix of this DNA. Crick said that he was countering the idea of vitalism. Vitalism was a way of saying that there is a vital principle, a life principle, a life energy, a life that there's, you know. And he said that was he's a materialist, right? This is a materialist view of life. He said that was a religious, a silly mythical assumption, because he knew, because he had looked at the structure of the DNA in the cell with an electron microscope, and he had looked at it, and there is no vital principle there. So he could he could save us from this weird idea that there's a vital principle, because he had checked it out and there wasn't. So now this is one of the great geniuses of our time. I mean, seriously, I'm not being sarcastic. This is an amazing genius, but he's an idiot. Okay, so I mentioned this to my 12 or 13-year-old son, and my son said, what did he expect to see? Little spheres with an S on it for spirit? All right. So
Great answer.
talk about not getting it. So what that doesn't get is that the extra thing, the added thing, the vital spirit is relationship, the relationship of the parts, the living relationship of the parts. And that's the metaphor for this whole class. Relationship, relationship, relationship. I want to say one other thing. One of the things that nature does is the building of our genetic heritage involves a repurposing. It always starts from some ground and then shifts from there. So there's a constant repurposing of the genetic materials and and instincts that come before. Just one example would be that the fact that the oxytocin is released to give us pleasure and to motivate us to do rewarding behaviors, like to eat or to have sex or just basic stuff. That oxytocin release then of pleasure led to having pleasure in attachment to young, in pair bonding, in father nurturing, in friendship, in group alliance. So that our genetic, potentially our genetic thing is a learning process that involves repurposing. One example of that is feathers. Apparently feathers were primarily at first for warmth and got repurposed for flying. So when you look at the blueprint, the examples I gave in the blueprint, right? The social suite, to experience ourselves as an individual, to love our offspring and partners, to have friendship, to have social networks, to cooperate, to have attachment to a group, to have mild hierarchy, to have a culture. What you see is growing, it's a growing circle. That the we is what there's in there is a growing capacity to have a growing we. And evolution is our development is a co-evolution of our genes and our culture, and they feed back to each other. The culture brings out and activates certain genes and not others, and certain genes help the culture survive and move on. So so we're back to our challenge of can we create a large enough we to be appropriate for the reach of our powers? And so that our pro-social instincts can apply to a larger we. And that's kind of my wrapping end. Yeah, let me just invite responses to that. And then I want to pretty quickly get into doing a little experiential piece.
I know I have some things to say, but other people haven't said much, so I would like to just invite others to come.
Cool. Thank you for that. Okay, I am going to shift because of time. And so the intention is to offer experiences that support our belonging and support our sense of relationship and connectedness. And we sort of started with primarily connecting to self, to life within us as our as a manifestation of life that's emerging in us, and that we have the special relationship of being fueled by and of tending to. And then again, contrary to the contradiction that loving and being connected to yourself is in contradiction to being connected to others in the world, that is the ground for a genuine, authentic connection with others. I think I mentioned this before. One of my early mentors, a Reichian therapist who was teaching hands-on therapy, said, before you touch someone, you have to enliven your hand. You have to enter your hand and enliven. If you touch someone with a dead hand, it's a sacrilege, it's an insult. So being present in your hand is a condition for respectfully touching the body and life of another human being. And then last time we moved it a little bit towards witnessing the outside and letting the outside witness you. And I encouraged a homework, which would be to go out in the world and have a conversation with the world, to be transparent to it, experience it witnessing you as well as you witnessing it. So I'm gonna do lead a little exercise for that, but I'm gonna start it with, and I think I have this set up right, with sharing a poem. And I'm gonna read it, but it's, can you all see that, I hope? Yeah? With my screen share, you're able to see the poem?
Yes.
Okay. Stand still. The trees ahead and the bushes beside you are not lost. Oh, the poem's called Lost. So lost. Stand still. The trees ahead and the bushes beside you are not lost. Wherever you are is called here. And you must treat it as a powerful stranger. Must ask permission to know it and be known. The forest breathes. Listen. It answers, I have made this place around you. If you leave it, you may come back again, saying, here. No trees are the same to raven. No two branches are the same to wren. If what a tree or a bush does is lost on you, you are surely lost. Stand still. The forest knows where you are. You must let it find you. So, isn't that wonderful? I'll send that out.
Yeah.
All right. So make yourself comfy and give a rest to the part of you that has all these important things to do and plans to make, and tell that part, thank you for being there and you'll be back. But you're taking a little break from it. And bring your attention to your bodily experience of life within you. How do you know, without needing anyone else to tell you, that you are not a beautiful marble statue of yourself? How do you experience irrefutably in the moment, in your experience, that you are a living creature? You may experience the processes of life in you. My heat just went on. Is that disturbing, or should I go on? I could turn the heat down, but I'd have to leave for a second. I'm going to go on. You may experience life in you as a warmth or tingling or an energy in some part or corner of your body. You may experience it as spreading throughout your body. You may experience it as a quiet and subtle presence. And you may have to get very quiet to experience it, as though it were a small spring in the desert or a small sprout in the desert. You may experience it as a raging storm throughout your body. However you experience it is how you experience it, and is what's authentically right for you at this moment. And how you experience it is likely to shift, and may particularly shift as you offer it your attention. This is not some esoteric woo-woo extra sensory thing. This is literal existence of life within you. There is a campfire in every mitochondria of every cell in your body. There are rivers of blood and streams and tiny trickles and rivulets that reach every campfire, every cell in your body, and bring it nutrients, and bring it oxygen, and remove the waste. There's an infinitely fine branching network of neurons that reaches every corner of your body. And there are delicate messages that get sent along that network. And there are also storms of energy that go through that network. There are winds and storms of hormones that flood every corner of your body and feed it with the messages it needs to respond to life. And there's an ever-present, steady drumbeat of your beating heart, like a drum in the jungle, that has accompanied you and will continue to accompany you through every moment of your living existence. spend a minute offering your loving attention to these processes within you. Offer it the healing honey of your attention. When you're done, not when you're done, but at some point, not yet, I'm going to ask you to open your eyes and look at the world around you. Look at the life around you, or look at something that has meaning to you around you. And notice the resonance between the life within you and the life outside. Why don't you do that now? Why don't you open your eyes and keep your connection to your own livingness and notice the resonance of that with the life you see around you. Offer that life you're witnessing. Offer the world around you you're witnessing, the world outside your skin you're witnessing. And make yourself transparent to that world to let it witness you. You are not lost. The trees are not lost. They're making a place for you, which you share, called here. If in witnessing the outside and letting the outside in, there's some movement that comes to you that you want to make, that you just feel called to make, that's part of that dialogue with between you and the world, a life within you and life without you. Do that. And when you're ready, open your eyes and rejoin the room and notice this amazing group of people that you've shared this hour and a half with. Let's go to that poem again. Can you see it? No, probably not. I
No.
didn't. No, I know why you're not seeing it. Hold on. Now it's up, right?
No, yes,
There.
yes.
Stand still. The trees ahead and the bushes beside you are not lost. Lost. Stand still. The trees ahead and the bushes beside you are not lost. Wherever you are is called here, and you must treat it as a powerful stranger. Must ask permission to know it and to be known. The forest breathes. Listen. It answers, I have made this place around you. If you leave it, you may come back again, saying here. No two trees are the same to raven. No two branches are the same to wren. If what a tree or a bush does is lost on you, you are surely lost. Stand still. The forest knows where you are. You must let it find you. And now I have, there we go. So there's this thing called forest bathing. I've not been trained in it. I only know mostly just know the word. But I like that word. And so I'm gonna, again, propose a homework, which is, well, how about 3 times this week? 2 or 3 times this week, spend 15 minutes or more, 15 minutes to half an hour, finding a place where you first witness a tree or something outside you, then allow yourself to be witnessed, to become transparent and let it witness you, so that you're in dialogue with it, and then express that dialogue however you want to, which might be a movement that the tree brings forth in you. Just see what happens. And we're going to take it a little more to movement next time. Did anyone try that last week, or? Yes, forest bathing, Gloria. Forest bathing. I like it. It's hard for me to keep my eyes on the chat, Gloria, but I'm noticing that it comes up, so that's good. Can everyone see that
Well,
on the screen?
see what? No.
Oh, okay.
Oh.
So in chat, Gloria says, yes, being silent in the huge silence, listening, just being. Yes, being silent in the huge silence, listening, just being. I think of the Simon Garfunkel song, what's the sound of silence.
Mhm.
There it is, the sound of silence. I get a ringing, there's a ringing and a sense of a vast plain. That's my experience of the sound of silence. I had that most powerfully once in the deep desert, where there's a silence like you never get here. And it's a place where the distinction between your hearing apparatus, am I hearing my ears or am I hearing the world, where the distinction collapses between the perceiver and the perceived. Well, it's been an honor meeting with you guys. I hope I get to do so again next week. So you can't see what in the middle of the screen, Gloria's thing. I will put it up. I will read it, but I have to get it up on the chat. From Gloria Mooney to everyone. Sitting in the backyard with the moving, singing bushes and trees, the wind chimes, the fountain bubbling, being in the sheer pleasure of it. That's so cool that you're writing to us. I love it. Thank you so much. Okay. Shall we part? Anyone want to have a parting word? Thank you, guys. See you again soon.
Thank
Right.
you.
All
Thank
right.
you.
See you next week.
Yeah. You want to hang, Peter?
Bob?
Yeah. I was just asking if you wanted to hang a minute or should we talk later?
I just wanted to tell you that Julia and Bryce arrived a half an hour ago from LA, so I had to kind
Sure.
of.
Can they say hello? Can you pull them up to say hello?
Well, Bryce is upstairs preparing for a class he's teaching, a Zoom class he's teaching, but
Okay.